The sweet, earthy aroma of boiling corn hung heavy in the air, mingling with the scent of burning wood that crackled softly in the clay stove. Xochitl's flour-dusted hands moved with practiced grace, shaping tortillas with a dexterity that only years of repetition could bestow. Her swollen belly, now prominent and rounded like a ripe melon, brushed against the worn edge of the wooden table as she leaned forward. A gentle smile played upon her lips, a reflection of the new life growing within her, and the simple happiness that filled her humble home. She whistled an ancient melody, a lullaby her own mother had sung to her countless times, already imagining the tiny face she would soon behold. The warmth from the fire heated not just the small kitchen but also her heart, filling it with a peace that seemed unshakable, eternal. Golden light from the late afternoon sun streamed through the small window, painting the kitchen in warm, welcoming tones, a scene of tranquility that Xochitl believed would last forever. The distant chirping of crickets began to fill the air, heralding the arrival of night, a night that promised to be as serene as the many that had come before. The rhythmic pat-pat-pat of her hands against the masa was meditative, almost hypnotic, as she worked the corn dough into perfect circles. Suddenly, the wooden door creaked on its rusty hinges, and Rigoberto entered. The air in the small kitchen seemed to freeze instantly, and the melody on Xochitl's lips died as surely as if someone had snuffed out a candle. His face, usually bronze and open, was now closed off a mask of stone she had never seen before. His eyes, once filled with a mischievous sparkle that had first captured her heart, were now dull, almost empty, like windows to an abandoned house. She dropped the tortilla she was about to place on the comal and turned, her eyes shining with anticipation, choosing to ignore the strange coldness he brought with him like an unwelcome guest. Her heart still held hope, still believed in the man she had married. Me Rigoberto, you're home early. The tortillas are almost ready, warm and fresh, just how you like them. She extended her arms to embrace him, a gesture of love and welcome she had performed 1,000 times before, but he pushed her away with a rough gesture, almost a shove, as if her very presence was an offense to his senses. Xochitl's smile faltered, replaced by an expression of confusion, and quickly, pain, a sharp pang that spread through her chest like spilled ink on fabric. She stumbled back, her hand instinctively going to her belly, protecting the life within. Don't come at me with your caresses, Xochitl. There's no time for that nonsense, Rigoberto said, his voice harsh and devoid of any affection, cutting through the air like a machete through sugarcane. He strode to the dark wooden trunk, the same one that housed the family's meager savings, an object that represented the security and future they were building. Tojtharan began to rummage through it with barely contained fury, his movements rough and chaotic. This is over, everything. This farm, this miserable life, all of it. He gestured wildly, as if trying to erase the very existence of everything around them. His hands shook as he searched, whether from anger or something else, Xochitl couldn't tell. A chill ran down Xochitl's spine, the warmth of the kitchen suddenly insufficient, as if the fire in the stove had been extinguished by an invisible hand. Her knees felt weak, but she forced herself to remain standing. What are you saying, Rigoberto? What madness is this? This is our home, our cornfield, our future. She tried to approach him again, her eyes pleading for an explanation, for a sign that this was just a nightmare from which she would soon wake, but he ignored her, his nimble fingers searching for the false bottom of the trunk where they kept what little they had saved. Our future. There is no future here, woman. Not with you, a useless thing who only knows how to birth girls. Rigoberto ranted, and the blow of his words hit Xochitl with the force of a physical punch, more devastating than any bodily assault could ever be. Her eyes filled with tears that spilled over like a dam breaking, and she brought her hand to her belly again, as if she could shield the life she carried from the cruelty of its father, from the evil that emanated from him like poison. I lost everything gambling, Xochitl. The farm isn't mine, it never was. It's all debt, and now they're coming to collect. And I am not going down with you. He spat the words, contempt evident in every syllable, each word a nail in the coffin of their life together. He finally found the leather pouch where they kept their coins, sweat gleaming on his forehead, his face twisted in an expression of greed and desperation that made him look like a stranger. The clinking of money sounded like a funeral bell in Xochitl's ears, a sound that announced the end of everything she had known and loved. And the worst part is that you're a burden, Xochitl. Dead weight. You haven't given me a son, and now you're pregnant again. With another girl, I am certain of it. He poured the coins into his palm, the glint of gold contrasting with the darkness in his ice of darkness that seemed to have swallowed any remnant of humanity he once possessed. But don't worry your pretty little head about it. I've already found my salvation. A rich woman who can give me what you never could, a real future, a useful woman who knows her place and her purpose. His lips curled into a cruel smile as he pocketed the coins. Rigoberto's words cut through Xochitl like razors, each one opening a deep wound in her soul that she knew would never fully heal. The room spun around her and she had to grip the table to keep from falling. Rigoberto, how can you say such things? I'm carrying our child, our blood, our legacy. She fell to her knees, tears flowing freely down her flour-dusted face, her body shaking uncontrollably. The cool earth beneath her knees seemed to ground her in this moment of unthinkable betrayal. Por favor, mi amor, don't leave me. Don't leave us. Think of our child. Her voice was a lament, a desperate plea that he seemed incapable of hearing, or perhaps simply chose to ignore. He laughed at a dry sound devoid of any human warmth, a sound that made Xochitl shrink into herself like a wounded animal. It was the laugh of a stranger, not the man who had once promised to love and protect her. Love. There's no love here, Xochitl. There never was, not on my part. You were just a convenience, a warm body to keep my bed in my house. Now get out. Get out of my house, out of my life. He grabbed the money pouch, shoving it into the bag he carried, and then, with surprising strength fueled by his cruelty, pushed Xochitl toward the door without an ounce of hesitation or remorse. She stumbled, her body heavy and clumsy with pregnancy, falling hard onto the packed dirt of the yard. The sweet scent of the tortillas she had been preparing still hung in the air, a cruel reminder of the happiness that had just been crushed, a brutal contrast to the reality of her fall. Dust rose around her, coating her tear-stained face. No, Rigoberto, por favor, where will I go? I'm alone. I'm pregnant. Her screams echoed through the cornfield, bouncing off the tall stalks that surrounded their home, but he paid no heed, his hurried steps taking him away without a backward glance. He walked with the purposeful stride of a man who had already moved on, who had already forgotten the woman crying in the dirt behind him. Rigoberto slammed the door with a resounding bang, final, definitive sound of his betrayal, a sound that sealed Xochitl's fate and echoed in her heart like thunder. She crawled to the wooden fence, her hands scraped by the earth and small stones, her body trembling, her heart in pieces. She looked at their house at the small window where the firelight still flickered like a dying ember, and felt an excruciating pain in her chest, a pain that seemed to tear her soul apart. Hijol Rigoberto, how could you do this to me? How could you? Her voice was pure anguish, a cry of despair that was lost in the whisper of wind through the tall corn leaves, which seemed to weep with her, their rustling a mournful symphony. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that should have been beautiful, but now seemed to mock her misery. For Xochitl, the world had turned gray, devoid of color and hope. She was alone, pregnant, and completely abandoned, the scent of corn and betrayal hanging heavy in the air, a constant reminder of her disgrace. The darkness of the approaching night seemed to mirror the darkness that had settled in her heart, a darkness so complete she wondered if she would ever see light again. Hours passed in a blur of tears and trembling. The rough bandage scratched at Xochitl's eyes, and the smell of mold and wet earth invaded her nostrils, a nauseating mixture that made her feel even more helpless. She felt the irregular sway of the horse beneath her, her hands tied firmly behind her back, her body aching from the forced position. Every jolt was torture, sending sharp pains through her pregnant belly, and fear gnawed at her insides, stronger than any physical pain. What would become of her? And her baby? Xochitl's mind spun in a whirlwind of panic and despair, images of an uncertain and dark future filling her thoughts. She tried to calm herself, to breathe deeply, but the air seemed thin, heavy with an anguish that suffocated her, as if an invisible hand were squeezing her throat. The journey seemed endless, each moment stretching into an eternity of discomfort and terror. She could hear Rigoberto occasionally muttering to himself, but his words were lost in the sound of hooves and her own. Ragged breathing. Suddenly, the horse stopped. The silence that followed was almost as terrifying as the incessant trotting, a silence that screamed abandonment. She heard the sound of Rigoberto dismounting, his heavy footsteps approaching, each one a blow to her heart. Xochitl's heart raced, beating erratically against her ribs, a drum of dread that seemed to echo in the stillness. She felt his hands on her arms, rough and impatient, and was pulled without ceremony from the horse. The impact with the ground was violent, and a sharp pain pierced her belly, a silent scream from her body that made her gasp. The metallic taste of blood invaded her mouth, a dark omen of what was to come. The bandage was ripped away with a cruel yank, and the weak light of the dying afternoon invaded her eyes, revealing a scene of complete desolation. She was sprawled on the floor of a dilapidated barn, the walls cracked and threatening to collapse at any moment. The roof, a patchwork of broken tiles and gaping holes, let pale, irregular light penetrate, revealing piles of old, dirty hay, thick cobwebs hanging like funeral shrouds, and the scurrying tracks of rats running along the beams. The smell of mold was overwhelming, mixed with the stench of dead animals and decay, a smell of abandonment and oblivion that made her stomach turn. The ranch was a symbol of desolation, a place where hope seemed to have died long ago, a mirror of her own shattered heart. Rigoberto, with a cruel smile that didn't reach his cold eyes, untied Xochitl's hands, throwing the rope to the ground with disdain, as if she were a worthless object he was finally discarding. He then tossed an old, faded ribozoa rough fabric shawl and a small bag of dried beans beside her, the items landing with dull thuds in the dust. "This is your place, Xochitl," he said, his voice cold and cutting, without a hint of remorse, as if pronouncing a death sentence. "Far from me and any future you thought you'd have. Don't come back. Don't even think about it." A dry, humorless laugh escaped Rigoberto's lips, a sound that echoed off the barn walls, mocking Xochitl's misery, a sound that made her shrink even further into herself. He turned his back and walked away, his footsteps echoing on the packed dirt floor, each step taking him further from her and the life they had built together. The sound of the horse moving away, the trotting gradually diminishing until it disappeared completely, left Xochitl alone in the growing darkness. The silence that followed was heavy, crushing, filled only with the sound of her own crying that seemed to have no end, that poured from her like blood from a mortal wound. Xochitl curled up on the floor, hugging her belly with trembling hands, feeling the life growing inside her, a life that now seemed so vulnerable, so fragile in this harsh world. A sharp, persistent pain radiated from her belly, and fear for her baby intensified with each beat of her heart. She felt the cold of the damp earth through her thin clothes, and tears flowed uncontrollably down her face, mixing with the dust and dirt, an image of complete helplessness. Then the first raindrop hit her face, cold and unexpected, a shock to her system. Others followed, and soon the rain began to fall heavily, soaking her through the gaps in the roof, a sound that amplified her sense of abandonment. The sound of drops hitting the roof and floor, increasingly intense, created a symphony of despair. Water ran down the walls, forming puddles on the dirt floor, and the barn, already gloomy, became even more damp and cold, a place of utter misery. "Ay mi Dios, what will become of us?" Xochitl whispered, her voice choked with tears, the words lost in the noise of the rain, a lament that mixed with the sound of nature's own tears. She hugged her belly even tighter, as if she could protect the small being inside her from the world's cruelty, from the coldness that surrounded them. The pain in her belly increased, sharp and insistent, and she feared that the stress and shock might harm her child. The thought sent fresh waves of panic through her already overwhelmed system. Xochitl was alone, abandoned in an unknown and hostile place, with body and soul in pieces. The ruined ranch, with its atmosphere of abandonment and despair, perfectly mirrored the state of her heart. The rain, falling relentlessly, seemed to wash away her last hopes, leaving her in a cold, dark void. She felt a chill run down her spine, and it wasn't just from the cold. It was fear, despair, the brutal reality of her new existence crashing down upon her like the rain itself. The destruction of her innocence was complete, and Xochitl's journey of pain had just begun, a journey she knew would be long and arduous, with no clear end in sight. The rain beat incessantly on the hole-riddled hayloft roof, each drop echoing the despair Xochitl felt, a melancholic rhythm that accompanied her suffering like a funeral dirge. She dragged herself to the driest corner she could find, her body shaking uncontrollably, teeth chattering against each other in a rapid staccato. The smell of wet hay and mold filled the air, mixing with the earthy aroma of rain, a fragrance of abandonment that seemed to seep into her very bones. Outside, darkness swallowed the landscape like a hungry beast, and the sounds of wildlife began to emerge from the shadows. Distant howls tore through the night, making Xochitl shrink even further into herself, fear tightening its grip on her chest like an iron fist. The rustling of leaves, the crack of branches, every noise amplified by the oppressive silence of her solitude, seemed to whisper threats in a language she didn't want to understand. Her stomach growled loudly, a cruel reminder of the hunger that gnawed at her insides, but fear was a more potent force, paralyzing her, preventing her from thinking about anything else. Survival seemed like an impossible task when every shadow could hide a predator, every sound could herald danger. With trembling hands that felt foreign to her own body, she tried to light a fire. The dry branches she had collected earlier were now damp from the persistent rain that found its way through every crack and hole. She rubbed one against another desperately, then tried with stones, striking them together until her hands ached, but nothing came of it. The smoke that rose was cold and without heat, dissipating quickly, a sign of her impotence against the elements. The cold, once a discomfort, transformed into a piercing pain that penetrated her bones, making her shake uncontrollably. Her teeth chattered against each other so hard she feared they might break, and with each contraction of her body, she felt a growing dread that settled in her stomach like a stone. The birth. What if labor began here, alone, in the middle of this desolation? The thought made her break out in a cold sweat despite the ice that enveloped her, a terror that paralyzed her more effectively than any rope could. There was no one to help her, no one to hold her hand, no one to hear her screams, just the echo of her own voice bouncing off uncaring walls. Her body ached with a deep, bone-weary exhaustion, every muscle protesting against the strain and cold of pain that seemed to consume every fiber of her being. Her head throbbed with a relentless rhythm, and the tears that had flowed freely before now seemed dry, stuck in her throat, a knot of anguish that threatened to choke her. She pulled the rebozo tighter around herself, a piece of fabric that was all that remained of her old world, a world that seemed to have existed in another lifetime, perhaps in someone else's life entirely. That world where she had been a beloved wife, where there had been laughter and the smell of fresh tortillas, where happiness had been a constant companion rather than a distant memory. The image of Rigoberto, his cold eyes and harsh voice, cut through her soul again, a wound that refused to heal, that seemed to reopen with every beat of her heart. He had thrown away everything they had, everything she was, for a card game and a woman he barely knew. The betrayal was an open wound, deeper than any physical pain, a pain she knew would accompany her for the rest of her days. As she huddled in her corner, trying to make herself as small as possible, her fingers bumped against something hard and rectangular beneath some old straw. With effort that seemed monumental in her weakened state, she pulled it free. It was a journal, dusty and worn by time, its leather covers cracked and the surface covered with the dust of ages. She opened it with careful fingers, the yellowed pages releasing a scent of the pasta smell of forgotten memories and abandoned dreams. The first pages were blank, untouched, like a silent invitation, an empty canvas, waiting to be filled with new stories, new hopes. A small symbol of possibility in a world that seemed devoid of it, a blank slate waiting for her story. She hugged the journal against her chest as if it were a shield against the world, against the cold, against the fear, against the loneliness that enveloped her like a shroud. Perhaps she could write her pain away, document her journey from this lowest point to somewhere else, anywhere else. A wave of despair hit her with such force that she felt the air escape from her lungs, a sensation of drowning in sorrow. It would be so easy to give up, to lie there and let the cold and hunger take her, to let the darkness swallow her whole. What was the point of fighting when the world had shown her such cruelty? But then an instinctive hand went to her belly, feeling the slight movement of life within, a flutter like butterfly wings that reminded her she was not alone. Her child, a new life, innocent of its father's sins, depending on her for everything. She couldn't give up, not now, not after everything, not when this small life beat beneath her heart with such determination. Xochitl closed her eyes, pulling the journal even closer, as if drawing strength from its blank pages. A voice, almost a whisper but firm with newfound resolve, emerged from her cracked lips. "I cannot give up my child. I cannot. We will survive this. We will thrive despite this." The phrase echoed in the silence of the hayloft, a promise made to herself and to the life growing inside her. It was a promise of resilience, of strength, that despite the pain and desolation, she would find a way to survive. She would become someone her child could be proud of. The night was still long and the cold cut through her like knives, but the small flame of hope, lit by the journal and the life she carried, began to glow, weak but present in the darkness. She knew the journey would be arduous, perhaps the hardest thing she would ever face, but for the first time since Rigoberto had abandoned her, Xochitl felt a glimmer of purpose. She would survive. For her child, she would survive. She would do more than survive. She would build a life worth living. Determination ignited in her eyes, a spark of fire amid the darkness that surrounded her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she had made a choice. She chose life. She chose hope. She chose to believe that this was not the end of her story, but perhaps, just perhaps, the beginning of something greater. The days stretched on, transforming into weeks, each one a silent battle for Xochitl's survival. Her belly, once just a subtle promise, now rounded with the life she carried, a constant reminder that she wasn't alone, that there was a future, however uncertain it might be. The ranch, a heap of rotten wood and broken tiles that threatened to collapse with each strong wind, was the only shelter she had. Xochitl knew she needed to transform it into something habitable before the baby arrived, before winter set in with its cruel fingers. Each dawn brought a new wave of energy, driven by necessity and hope that refused to die. She began to clean with movements slowed by pregnancy, but with a determination that came from a deep place within her, a well of strength she hadn't known existed. Every piece of debris removed, every cobweb swept away, was a small triumph, a victory over disorder and abandonment. The dust covered her clothes and hair, settling into every crevice, but she didn't care. Her eyes, once full of despair, now shone with renewed purpose, a light that guided her through the darkest moments. One day, while rummaging through a forgotten corner of the barn, her fingers touched something soft beneath a pile of old hay. It was a cloth bag, dusty and almost disintegrated by time and neglect, but inside, to her amazement, Xochitl found a handful of corn seeds. They were old, wrinkled by time, some cracked and seemingly lifeless, but there was a tenuous hope that they might still germinate. A small spark of hope ignited in her chest a promise of life from what seemed dead. With the seeds firmly in her hands, held like precious jewels, Xochitl went out to the arid land surrounding the ranch. The soil was hard and parched, cracked by the relentless Suna challenge to be overcome, a test of her newfound determination. She had no tools, so with unwavering stubbornness that would have made mountains move, she began to dig with her own hands. Her nails broke, leaving jagged edges that caught on everything. The earth lodged under them, creating dark crescents of dirt, and her palms became rough and painful, blistered and bleeding. But she continued, opening small furrows in the earth with fingers that refused to quit, carefully depositing each seed, as if planting a piece of her own heart, a piece of her future in the unforgiving ground. Water was a constant problem that haunted her days. The nearest stream was a considerable distance away, and Xochitl didn't have the strength to carry heavy buckets for so long, especially in her condition. She looked at the sky with desperate eyes, imploring for rain with silent prayers, and nature, as if hearing her silent cry, answered. When the first drops began to fall, Xochitl ran outside with an energy she didn't know she possessed, dragging everything she could find. Rusty buckets with holes she plugged with mud, old pots with cracks she sealed with cloth, even an upturned straw hat that could hold a precious cup or two. She collected every precious drop, watching the dirty water accumulate with the satisfaction of someone gathering gold coins, knowing it was the life her seeds needed, essence of her hope made liquid. The ranch's roof was a disaster that seemed to mock her efforts, with holes that allowed wind and rain to enter without restriction, turning her shelter into little more than a partial covering. Xochitl had no construction experience, but she had necessity as her teacher, a harsh but effective instructor. She found some loose boards, their wood soft with rot but still serviceable, and pieces of broken tiles scattered across the floor like fallen teeth. With a rusty hammer she found in an abandoned toolbox, its head loose and handle cracked, attempted repairs that would have made any carpenter weep. Each hammer blow was uncertain, often missing the nail entirely and hitting her already injured fingers. Her fingers bled, leaving red smears on the wood. The pain in her back intensified with each movement, a constant reminder of her condition, but she didn't stop. She learned through trial and error, her determination overcoming her inexperience, her will to survive stronger than any obstacle the world could throw at her. The days followed, marked by the rhythm of her hard work, a rhythm that became her heartbeat, her reason for rising each morning. She cleaned, dug, planted, collected water, and attempted repairs with a single-minded focus that would have impressed even the hardest workers. Her body was exhausted beyond measure, but her spirit, surprisingly, was stronger than ever, forged in the fires of adversity into something unbreakable. She talked to the baby in her belly, sharing her plans in a soft voice full of love, telling stories about the seeds that would one day become corn tall enough to touch the sky, about the roof that would one day protect them from all storms, about the future they would build together with their own four hands. "You see, little one," she would whisper, her hand caressing her belly, "Mama is building us a home. It may not look like much now, but just wait. Y'all see. We'll have corn as tall as trees and a roof that doesn't leak. We'll have chickens for eggs and maybe even a cow for milk. Y'all never know hunger, my love. Never." One morning, as Xochitl cleaned the barn with slow, careful movements, a subtle movement caught her attention from the corner of her eye. In the darkest corner, almost hidden under a pile of straw that looked undisturbed for years, was a chicken. She was thin to the point of being skeletal, her feathers matted and dirty, and she looked as lost and helpless as Xochitl had felt in the beginning, a kindred spirit in suffering. The chicken looked at her with small, curious eyes that held a spark of life, a glimmer of existence amid the desolation. Xochitl knelt slowly, her movements careful not to startle the creature, extending her hand with the caution of someone approaching a wild animal. The chicken didn't flee. Instead, she tilted her head, studying this strange human who had invaded her hiding place. There was something in the animal's fragility that touched Xochitl deeply, a recognition of shared struggle. It was a small sign of life amid so much desolation, a reminder that life always finds a way, no matter how harsh the circumstances. A soft smile, almost forgotten in recent weeks, appeared on Xochitl's lips. She felt a wave of affection and an unexpected connection with that creature, a bond forged in mutual survival. It was as if the chicken were a mirror of her own resilience, showing her that even the seemingly weakest could endure. She picked her up carefully, feeling the small body tremble in her hands, a comforting warmth against her work-roughened palms. "Oriel, little friend," Xochitl whispered, her voice hoarse with emotion. "Together we'll make it. You and me and this little one. We're a family now." The chicken let out a small cluck as if in agreement, and settled into Xochitl's arms with surprising trust. And in that moment, Xochitl knew that despite all adversities, she wasn't alone. She had her baby, her seeds of hope planted in the unforgiving earth. And now, a little chicken, an unexpected companion on her journey of reconstruction. The morning sun streamed through the cracks in the barn, illuminating the scene with golden fingers, a new beginning painted in light and shadow. From that day forward, the chicken, whom she named Esperanza, meaning hope, became her constant companion, following her around the property with devoted loyalty, pecking at insects and weeds, and providing the occasional egg that Xochitl treasured like gold. The search for potable water led Xochitl to follow a barely visible deer path through the thorny brush. After what seemed like hours of careful walking, her dress catching on every branch and thorn, she heard the whisper of running water. Her parched throat seemed to recognize the sound before her mind did, and she moved faster, drawn by an almost magnetic pull. The stream, when she finally found it, was small but clear, its crystalline waters whispering promises of relief over smooth stones. She followed the stream's course, each step a silent prayer of gratitude, until the dense vegetation began to open up, revealing the first signs of a settlement. Small adobe houses with thatched roofs nestled among leafy trees like birds in nests, and the smell of wood smoke and dried herbs hung in the air, an aroma of life and community that made her heart ache with longing. In the village center, in a little house older and more welcoming than the other, sits walls covered with climbing vines, and its doorway worn smooth by countless passages, Xochitl found Doña Remedios. She was an elderly woman whose wrinkles seemed to tell stories of centuries, each line a chapter in a book of living wisdom. Her eyes, though tired from years of seeing too much, sparkled with an ancestral wisdom that seemed to penetrate directly into one's soul. Remedios sat on a low stool, grinding herbs in a clay bowl with movements slow and deliberate, like someone who knew the secrets of earth and time, and saw no need to rush either. "Bendiciones, mi hija," Remedios said, her voice soft as the whisper of wind through leaves, carrying the weight of ages. She looked up, and her eyes met Xochitl's, and it was as if Remedios could see the tired soul and resilient spirit inhabiting the young woman's body, could read her story in the dust on her clothes and the determination in her stance. "I see the journey has been long and hard. Come, sit. Your body cries out for rest, and your spirit needs tending." Xochitl, exhausted beyond measure, accepted the invitation gratefully, feeling a strange familiarity and comfort in the presence of this woman she had never met. The advanced pregnancy weighed on her limbs like stones, and every muscle ached with a deep, bone-weary pain. Remedios observed Xochitl's prominent belly, and the pallor in her face with eyes that missed nothing, a look of deep compassion mixed with practical assessment. "The fruit in your womb is a blessing," Remedios said, and her eyes softened with a grandmother's tenderness. "But you need strength, mi hija. The child draws from you and you have little left to give. Let me care for you." Without asking permission, for she was the type who knew when help was needed, and provided it without ceremony, Remedios prepared a tea with aromatic herbs. The hot steam, rising in spirals and warming the air with scents both familiar and mysterious. She offered Xochitl a clay cup worn smooth by countless hands, and the bitter but comforting taste of the tea spread through her mouth, bringing almost immediate relief, a sensation of peace that seemed to flow from her tongue to her very soul. "This is lemon balm," Remedios explained, pointing to the dried leaves with a gnarled finger, "to calm the mind and body when they war against each other. And this," she picked up another leaf, holding it to the light, "is chamomile for the pains that come with carrying life. Nature offers us everything we need, child. We need only know how to ask and how to listen." In the days that followed, Xochitl found in Doña Remedios not just a healer, but a mentor, a guide to mysteries she had never imagined existed. Remedios shared her knowledge of medicinal herbs and plants with the patience of someone who had taught these secrets many times before, teaching Xochitl to recognize each one by sight, smell, and even taste, to understand their purposes as clearly as she understood hunger or thirst, and to prepare teas and poultices to relieve the pains of pregnancy and hard work. "The earth, mihija," Remedios would say as the two walked through the small herb garden that seemed to contain every plant that had ever grown, "is like life itself. If you care for it with love and respect, it gives you fruits. If you honor it, it nurtures you in return. It has its own rhythms, its own secrets, its own language. And you, Xochitl, have the gift to hear these secrets. Not everyone does. It's a blessing and a responsibility." Xochitl absorbed every word like parched earth soaking up rain, every teaching becoming part of her. She learned to feel the earth beneath her feet as a living thing, to identify the smell of plants even with her eyes closed, to observe the changes in the sky that foretold weather days in advance. Her connection with nature, which before had been merely a necessity for survival, transformed into a profound communion, a conversation between equals. She came to see the earth not as an enemy to be conquered, but as an ally to be respected, an inexhaustible source of life and wisdom that would provide if properly honored. Remedios also perceived the thirst for knowledge that burned in Xochitl like an unquenchable flame. In her small house, she kept a collection of ancient books, their pages yellowed and covers worn to softness. They were books about herbs and their uses, about the stars and their meanings, about the stories of the people who had walked this land for generations. Remedios, patiently as if teaching a child, began to teach Xochitl to read and write. "Words are seeds, mihija," Remedios said as Xochitl traced letters with her finger on paper precious as gold. "They can bloom into ideas that change the world, into dreams that lift you from the earth, into knowledge that no one can take from you. Don't let anyone extinguish your light or your capacity to learn. Knowledge is the only wealth that multiplies when shared." Xochitl, who had never had the opportunity to study for what use did a farm wife have for letters, dove into the books with surprising avidity. She absorbed every word, every phrase, as a sponge thirsty for water it had never tasted. The stories and knowledge contained in those ancient books opened a new world for her, expanding her mind and strengthening her spirit in ways she couldn't have imagined. She began to see the world differently, with new eyes that saw possibility where before there had been only limitation. The naivety that had characterized her before Rigoberto's betrayal began to be replaced by practical wisdom and unshakable resilience. She understood that life was a cycle of death and rebirth, and that even from pain and abandonment, something new and beautiful could emerge like her corn growing from seemingly dead seeds. The woman who had begged on her knees was transforming into someone else entirely. "No matter how dark the night, mihija," Remedios said one evening as Xochitl read by candlelight, her eyes hungry for knowledge, "the sun always rises. It's the one certainty we have in this uncertain world. And you, Xochitl, have the strength of the sun within you. Use it to light your own path and the path of those who will come after." Each day, Xochitl felt herself growing stronger, more connected to herself and the world around her. The pain of Rigoberto's betrayal was still there, a deep scar on her soul that would never fully heal, but it no longer defined her. Instead, it drove her forward, pushed her to build a better future for herself and the baby that was coming. She was learning to trust her own intuition, to listen to her heart's voice, and to find her own strength in life's simplicity and nature's wisdom. The seed of hope she had planted in her ranch was blooming, and with it, a new Xochitl was being born, stronger and wiser than ever before, a woman who would never again depend on anyone else for her happiness or survival. The sun beat down on Xochitl's back as she worked meticulously in the earth, her calloused but determined hands coaxing life from the reluctant soil. The small patch of green shoots, her precious corn, stood as a testament to her unbreakable spirit. Each tiny plant represented a victory against impossible odds, a defiance of the fate Rigoberto had tried to condemn her to. The air was warm and dry, and the smell of freshly turned earth hung in the air like incense in a cathedral of her own making. Suddenly, a small shadow fell across the rows. Xochitl looked up, shielding her eyes with her hand against the bright sun, and saw a boy, no older than 5 years, standing timidly at the edge of the field. His clothes were worn and patched, and his eyes, large and dark as river stones, held a touch of hunger that Xochitl recognized all too well. "Hello," Xochitl said softly, her voice gentle as a lullaby. "Are you lost, little one?" The boy shook his head, his gaze fixed on the small basket of tortillas and beans Xochitl had set aside for lunch. She had learned to make her meager supplies stretch, but there was always enough to share. "I am Crisanto," he murmured, his stomach growling audibly in the quiet afternoon. Xochitl's heart clenched with empathy. She remembered all too well what it was to feel hunger and be alone, to have that gnawing emptiness that went beyond the physical. Without hesitation, she made a decision. "Would you like to share my lunch, Crisanto?" she offered, extending the basket with a warm smile. Crisanto's eyes lit up like stars, and he nodded eagerly, approaching with the caution of a wild animal that had learned to be wary of kindness. He ate quickly but with a silent gratitude that touched Xochitl deeply. She watched him, seeing in his careful movements and darting glances a kindred spiritan of her soul the world had been unkind to. As they finished, a man's voice, deep and resonant with worry, called from beyond the trees that bordered her small plot. "Crisanto, Crisanto, where are you?" Crisanto's head snapped up, recognition flooding his features, and he stood quickly, brushing crumbs from his worn shirt. A moment later, a tall figure emerged from the dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves. He was a man of few words. She could tell that immediately from the way he held himself, his face marked by a silent sadness that seemed etched into his very bones. But his eyes, though sad, held a deep kindness that couldn't be hidden. This was Emiliano, Crisanto's father, a widower raising his son alone on a nearby ranch. His gaze swept over Xochitl, taking in her worn clothes that spoke of hard work, her tired but resolute expression that refused to be defeated, and the small field of corn that was beginning to flourish against all odds. "Thank you for feeding my son," Emiliano said, his voice low and measured. "He sometimes wanders off, following butterflies or chasing dreams." "It was no trouble," Xochitl replied, a slight blush rising to her cheeks under his steady gaze. There was something in the way he looked at her, not with pity or judgment, but with a recognition of shared struggle. Emiliano's eyes turned to the dilapidated roof of Xochitl's ranch, a silent testament to her ongoing battle against the elements. He studied it with the practiced eye of someone who knew construction, who understood the language of wood and stone. "I see you're trying to fix the roof," he observed, his voice neutral but not unkind. "It's a big job for one person especially." He trailed off, his eyes flickering to her rounded belly, but Xochitl understood. "Especially for a pregnant woman alone." Xochitl sighed, a touch of weariness creeping into her voice despite her best efforts. "I am learning," she said, a wry smile playing at her lips. "It's been an education." Emiliano nodded slowly, a decision forming behind his thoughtful eyes. "I could help," he offered, his gaze returning to meet Xochitl's. "I am good with my hands, and it looks like you could use an extra pair. I know what it's like to need help and have too much pride to ask for it." Xochitl was surprised by the offer and even more by the understanding in his voice. She hadn't expected such kindness, especially from a man who seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. "That's very kind of you, Emiliano," she said, warmth spreading through her chest like sunrise. "I wouldn't say no. Pride is a luxury I can no longer afford." From that day forward, Emiliano became a silent, constant presence at the ranch. He didn't intrude or offer unwanted advice, but his strong, capable hands made quick work of repairs that had seemed insurmountable to Xochitl. The creaking boards of the roof slowly found their stability under his patient ministrations. He worked diligently, often in comfortable silence that didn't need filling with empty words, and Xochitl found herself appreciating his calm efficiency, and the way he never made her feel like a charity case. They began sharing meal-simple, hearty fare that tasted better for the company, and gradually, a quiet trust began to build between them like a bridge across troubled water. They were two souls who had known loss, who understood that sometimes the best comfort was simply presence without pity. Chrysanto, for his part, was completely captivated by Xochitl. He followed her everywhere like a devoted shadow, his eyes bright with curiosity and growing affection. He would sit quietly while Xochitl worked in the garden, asking endless questions about the plants in his piping voice, his small fingers tracing the leaves with wonder as she patiently explained their uses and secrets. Xochitl answered each question with care, remembering Doña Remedios' words about knowledge being meant for sharing. The boy brought her wildflowers he found on his wandering, small, precious gifts that Xochitl treasured more than gold. He would present them with shy pride, and she would exclaim over each one as if it were a rare treasure, which to her they were. His innocent affection was a balm to her tired soul, a reminder of life's simple joys that existed even in hardship. Emiliano watched Xochitl's interaction with Chrysanto with growing warmth. He saw her patience when the boy asked the same question for the third time, her gentleness when he accidentally stepped on the young corn shoots, the way she included him in her tasks, teaching him about the plants and the earth with the same care Remedios had shown her. He saw how Chrysanto bloomed under her attention, how the boy who had been so withdrawn since his mother's death began to open up like a flower in spring, to laugh more freely. And each time he saw Xochitl smilerially smile, not the polite expression she wore like armor, a sensation of warmth spread through his own chest like honey. He realized that Xochitl wasn't just a strong, hardworking woman, but also a gentle, compassionate soul capable of healing and nurturing, even while her own wounds were still fresh. One particularly sweltering afternoon, when the heat shimmered off the ground in waves, Xochitl stood in the cornfield, her back aching with a deep, persistent pain, sweat running down her temples in rivulets. The corn stalks, now tall and vibrant as a jungle, were heavy with their first ripe ears. The sight of them filled her with an emotion too complex for words. Xochitl reached out, her fingers trembling slightly with anticipation and perhaps a touch of disbelief, and picked the first ripe ear. It was firm and fat, its kernels a rich golden yellow that seemed to capture sunlight itself. A wave of emotion crashed over Hayloft, triumph, and an overwhelming sense of accomplishment that brought her to her knees. Tears sprang to her eyes, blurring the edges of the vibrant green stalks into an impressionist painting of joy. This was it. This was the fruit of her labor, her resilience, her unwavering hope made manifest. These golden kernels were proof that she could create life from desolation, abundance from abandonment. Emiliano, who had been mending a nearby fence with his usual quiet competence, saw the tears, saw the raw, unbridled joy on Xochitl's face that transformed her from merely pretty to absolutely radiant. He approached, his steps soft on the earth, and stood beside her, understanding the magnitude of this moment without needing explanation. He didn't speak a word, knew that sometimes words only diminish the sacred, but simply watched Xochitl clutch the ear of corn against her chest, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs of happiness. Then, moving with deliberate care, he gently reached out, his hand resting on Xochitl's shoulder. His touch was warm, comforting, a gesture of silent support that said more than any words could convey. It was an acknowledgement of her journey, a recognition of her strength. Xochitl looked up, her eyes still glistening with tears like morning dew, meeting his. In his gaze, she saw no pity would have turned away from pity, but understanding, admiration, and a quiet strength that mirrored her own. She saw a man who had also known struggle, who understood that sometimes the smallest victories were the greatest triumphs. Slowly, as if drawn by an invisible force, Emiliano leaned down, his eyes never leaving Xochitl's. His lips, soft and tender, found hers in a kiss that tasted of promise. It was a kiss born of shared struggle, of silent understanding, of a respect that had blossomed in the fields under the hot sun. It wasn't a kiss of desperate passion, but of quiet reverence, an acknowledgement of the formidable spirit that resided within Xochitl. It was a kiss that said, "I see you. I see your strength. I honor it." When he finally pulled away, his thumb gently wiped a tear from Xochitl's cheek with infinite tenderness. His voice, a soft murmur that seemed to come from his very soul, was filled with deep admiration. "You are an extraordinary woman, Xochitl. What you've built here, it's nothing short of a miracle." Xochitl looked at him, her heart swelling with a warmth she hadn't felt in what seemed like a lifetime. In his eyes, she saw a promise of quiet companionship, of shared burdens that would weigh less when carried together, and perhaps of a future she hadn't dared to dream could still be hers. The first harvest had brought more than just corn. It had brought hope and a connection that seemed as deep and rooted as the earth itself. The sun set on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and rosy, a perfect backdrop for the blossoming of new love built on the solid foundation of mutual respect and understanding. As they stood together in the cornfield, surrounded by the fruits of her labor, Xochitl felt something shift inside her. The broken woman who had been abandoned in a dilapidated barn was transforming into someone new, Zomion, stronger, someone who could not only survive but thrive, someone who could love again, but this time with the wisdom to choose a partner who saw her strength as something to celebrate, not suppress. The first searing pain tore through Xochitl like lightning, stealing her breath and forcing a groan from her lips that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. She was alone in the humble ranch, the sun already dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that she couldn't appreciate through her pain. The rhythmic contractions had started hours ago, subtle at first like distant thunder warning of an approaching storm, but now they were that storm itself, crashing against her, demanding everything she had to give. She gripped the rough wooden table with white knuckles, her body trembling with effort and fear. Each wave of pain brought with it the terrible realization that this was it, the moment she had prepared for but felt completely unprepared to face. How could anyone be prepared for this? Tears streamed down her face, not from fear alone, but from the pure, overwhelming intensity of bringing life into the world. "Oh, my child," she whispered, her voice hoarse with strain, "You're coming. You're really coming." The words were part prayer, part amazement, part terror. Meanwhile, in the nearby village, Crisanto's young face was creased with worry as he tugged urgently at Emiliano's sleeve. The boy had developed an almost supernatural sense for when something was wrong with Xochitl, as if their hearts were connected by invisible threads. "Emiliano, Xochitl, something's wrong. She was supposed to meet me to collect eggs, but she didn't come, and I saw her lamp lit at the ranch flickering strange-like." Emiliano's heart leaped into his throat. He had felt a strange uneasiness all day, a sensation like ants crawling under his skin that something was amiss. He knew Xochitl was close to giving birth, had seen the way she moved more carefully, the way her hand went to her back more often. The thought of her alone in that remote ranch facing the trial of childbirth without help filled him with a protective urgency that surprised him with its intensity. "Chrysanto, stay here with the neighbors," he ordered, his voice firm but kind, already moving toward his horse. "I am going to her." He mounted his horse, the old mare responding to his unspoken plea for speed, and galloped toward the ranch as if chased by demons. The failing light barely illuminated the winding path, turning familiar landmarks into strange shadows, but he knew the way by heart. No had traveled it so many times to help with repairs, to share meals, to simply be in Xochitl's presence. The ranch appeared before him like a beacon in the growing darkness, a single weak light fighting against the approaching night. As he dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with urgency, Emiliano heard a low moan, a sound of deep pain that sent chills down his spine and made his hands shake as he reached for the door. He burst through the creaking door, his eyes immediately finding Xochitl bent double, her face contorted in agony that made his heart clench. She was a warrior in the midst of battle, fighting to bring life into the world with nothing but her own strength and determination. "Xochitl," he cried, rushing to her side, his usual reserve crumbling in the face of her need. He was a man of few words, but his presence, his strong, steady hand on her back, was an immeasurable comfort. He remembered Doña Remedios, the wise healer who had become Xochitl's teacher, and knew instinctively that Xochitl needed her wisdom now more than ever. "I'll be right back," he promised, his voice filled with an urgency she understood even through her pain. "I'm going to get Doña Remedios. You're not alone. I promise you're not alone." But as Emiliano turned to leave, his heart hammering with the need to hurry, a figure emerged from the deepening twilight as if summoned by his thoughts. It was Doña Remedios herself, her small, sturdy silhouette backlit by the last vestiges of sunset. She carried a worn leather bag that rattled softly with the tools of her trade, and her face wore an expression of calm certainty. "I felt it, Emiliano," she said, her voice calm and wise as an ancient tree. "The earth called out that a new soul was ready to join us. I knew she would need me. The spirits whispered it in my dreams last night." Her presence was like a balm to the chaotic energy in the small room, immediately bringing order to disorder. She moved with quiet authority, her hands gentle but firm as she guided Xochitl to the improvised bed, every movement speaking of countless births attended, countless mothers comforted. "Breathe, Mija," she instructed, her voice a low, soothing hum that seemed to vibrate with the rhythm of the earth itself. "Breathe with the earth, with the wind, with the ancestors who watch over you. Let the pain flow through you like water. Don't fight ignorance with it." The hours that followed blurred into a tapestry of pain and effort, of Doña Remedios' soft words that seemed to carry ancient power, and Emiliano's silent, unwavering support. He held Xochitl's hand through it all, his thumb tracing patterns on her skin that seemed to write promises of safety, offering a quiet strength that anchored her to this world when the pain threatened to carry her away. She squeezed his hand so hard she was sure she must be breaking bones, but he never flinched, never pulled away. Xochitl, despite the immense suffering that seemed to split her very soul, found a primal power within herself, a fierce determination to bring her child into the world that connected her to every mother who had come before. She was no longer just Xochitl. She was woman, she was life-bringer. She was the earth itself opening to release new growth. And then, with one last, powerful push that seemed to draw on every reserve of strength she had ever possessed, a cry pierced the Ira sound so pure, so full of life and possibility, that it brought tears to Xochitl's eyes and made even stoic Emiliano's eyes glisten. It was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard, a declaration of arrival that said, "I am here. I have made it. I am alive." Doña Remedios, her face radiant with the joy that never dimmed no matter how many births she attended, lifted a small, squalling bundle. The baby's cries were strong and healthy, filling the small space with the unmistakable sound of vigorous new life. A daughter, Xochitl, strong and healthy as her mother. Listen to those lungs shell be heard across the valley. Xochitl, exhausted but overwhelmed by a love she had never known could exist, a love so fierce, it almost frightened her, reached out with trembling arms, her fingers shaking as they touched her daughter's impossibly soft skin. The baby, wrapped in a clean cloth that Remedios had brought, was perfect in every way. Her tiny fists opened and closed like small flowers. Her eyes, still adjusting to this bright new world, blinked slowly as if in wonder. "Paloma," Xochitl whispered, her voice thick with emotion that threatened to overflow. "I'll call her Paloma for peace and new beginnings. My little dove who will know only love." Emiliano watched, a soft smile gracing his lips, his heart swelling with an emotion he couldn't name or perhaps didn't dare to. Was it possible to love a child that wasn't yours by blood at first sight? Crisanto, who had bravely followed Emiliano back to the ranch despite orders to stay behind, peeked around the doorframe, his eyes wide with wonder at the sight of the tiny new life. His expression was one of pure awe, as if witnessing magic. The next morning, the world seemed to vibrate with new vitality, as if Paloma's arrival had awakened something in the very earth. The air was fresh and clear, carrying the scent of dew and new growth, and the sun, rising majestically over the mountains, cast a golden glow over the ranch that made everything look blessed. Xochitl, though exhausted in a way that went beyond the physical, felt a profound sense of renewal. She sat outside in a chair Emiliano had carved for her, cradling Paloma, the baby sleeping deeply in her arms with the trust only the newly born possess. Emiliano and Crisanto had already gone out to the fields at first light, and now they returned, their faces illuminated by an excitement that mirrored her own, carrying news that would complete the miracle of this new day. "Xochitl," Emiliano exclaimed, his usual reserve abandoned in his joy. "The corn, it's ready. It's more than ready, it's magnificent." Xochitl looked toward the fields and her breath caught in her throat. Where once there had been struggling stalks fighting for life in hard soil, now there was a vibrant sea of green that seemed to go on forever. The corn stalks stood tall and proud as soldiers, their ears heavy and golden, swaying gently in the morning breeze like they were dancing in celebration. It was an abundance she could hardly believe, a miracle born of her perseverance, her sweat and tears, and her unwavering hope that had refused to die even in the darkest moments. Tears sprang to her eyes, not of pain or sadness this time, but of pure, unadulterated joy that seemed too big for her body to contain. She held Paloma closer, pressing a soft kiss to her tiny head that smelled of new life and infinite possibility. This was their first great victory, the tangible proof of her resilience, the fruit of her labor made manifest in golden kernels and tiny fingers. She looked at the thriving field where her corn reached toward the sky, then at her sleeping daughter whose whole life stretched before her unmarked and full of potential, and a deep sense of peace enveloped her like a warm blanket. They had made it through the darkness. They had survived when survival seemed impossible. They had thrived when the world had written them off. "We did it, my daughter," Xochitl whispered, her voice thick with emotion, the words a promise and a declaration. "We did it, and this is just the beginning." The smell of freshly ground corn filled the air with its sweet earthiness, mixing with the aroma of masa and the subtle perfume of herbs simmering in clay pots. Xochitl's hands skillfully shaped tortillas with movements that had become second nature, humming a soft melody that seemed to make the work lighter. The ranch, once a place of silent despair that echoed with emptiness, now bustled with purpose and life. Emiliano, his sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms marked by honest work, methodically fed dried corn into a new manual grinder, the rhythmic grinding a steady heartbeat to their labor. The machine had been his gift to her, purchased with savings he'd kept for emergencies, because he'd said her success was worth investing in. Crisanto, always eager to help and be part of this new family they were building, carefully stacked the finished tortillas in a warm cloth, his movements careful and precise as if handling treasures. "Xochitl, these are perfect," Emiliano said, his voice warm with genuine admiration. Chrysanto and I can take the first batch to the market this afternoon. I predict they'll sell faster than morning dew disappears. Xochitl smiled, a genuine, radiant expression that reached her eyes and transformed her face. The woman who had once cowered and begged was gone, replaced by someone who stood tall and faced the world with confidence. "Thank you, Emiliano, but we need to do more. I have an idea that came to me in a dream." She gestured to a small basket filled with various herbs and wildflowers she had gathered from the fields surrounding their land. "Well, make tamales. Too, but not just any tamales. Well, infuse them with these gifts from the earth." She lifted a sprig of epazote, inhaling its pungent scent, for flavor and for a special touch that no one else has. Doña Remedios taught me that food is medicine, and medicine can be delicious. Well, heal bodies and souls with our cooking. In the weeks that followed, the abandoned ranch transformed into a center of activity that drew people like a magnet. Xochitl, with Emiliano's unwavering support and Chrysanto's youthful energy, turned her abundant corn harvest into a thriving business that grew beyond her wildest dreams. Her tortillas, soft and fragrant with the essence of earth and tradition, quickly became favorites at the local market. But it was Xochitl's innovative tamales, infused with unique combinations of local herbs like epazote, hoja santa, and even a touch of squash blossoms, that truly set them apart from anything else available. People began lining up before dawn, drawn by the irresistible aromas that seemed to promise not just sustenance but comfort, healing, and a taste of home even for those who had never known such warmth. Women whispered that Xochitl's tamales had cured their children's stomach ailments, that her tortillas had brought luck to their households. Whether true or not, the reputation grew. Xochitl, always thinking ahead with a mind sharpened by necessity, realized they needed more hands to meet the growing demand. She approached several women in the village who, like her, had faced hardships and struggled to survive in a world that seemed designed to keep them down. She saw herself in their worried faces, in the way they counted coins with shaking fingers, in how they looked at their children with love mixed with fear for their futures. The first to join was Alina, a young widow with 3 children whose husband had died in a mining accident. She had always been a talented cook, but lacked the resources and confidence to start her own venture. Her hands shook when she first approached Xochitl, pride warring with desperation in her eyes. Xochitl welcomed her with open arms and an open heart, teaching her not just how to perfect the tamale recipes, but also the intricacies of sourcing ingredients, managing inventory, and dealing with customers who could sometimes be demanding or difficult. She shared every secret, held nothing back, because she remembered Doña Remedios' words about knowledge multiplying when shared. "Xochitl, I don't know how to thank you," Alina said one afternoon, her eyes glistening with grateful tears as she expertly folded a tamale, her movements now as fluid as Xochitl's own. "You've given me hope again when I thought I'd forgotten what hope felt like. My children smile now. They laugh. I had forgotten the sound." Xochitl placed a comforting hand on Alina's shoulder, feeling the woman's tension ease under her touch. "We all rise together, Alina. We lift each other up because that's what makes us strong. This ranch isn't just about making money. It's about building something lasting together. It's about showing our daughters that they don't need anyone's permission to succeed." Soon, other women joined them. Maria, an experienced cook who brought her own traditional recipes, passed down through generations and wisdom about preserving food for lean times. Carmen, whose knowledge of the market helped them price their goods fairly while still making a profit. And several younger women eager to learn a trade and contribute to their families while discovering their own strength. The ranch, once echoing with silence and abandonment, now buzzed with conversation, laughter, and the steady rhythm of productive work. The scent of corn, peppers, and herbs floated in the air like incense, a delicious testament to their collective efforts. Each woman brought her own special touch, Maria's secret spice blend. Carmen's decorative way of wrapping tamales that made them look like gifts, the younger women's energy, and new ideas about flavors that appealed to changing tastes. Xochitl's leadership was natural and inspiring, born not from a desire to control but from genuine care for each woman's success. She empowered each woman to experiment with flavors, to take ownership of their tasks, and to share their own unique skills. She organized workshops in the evenings, teaching them basic accounting and marketing, showing them how to calculate costs, set prices that valued their work fairly, and present their products in ways that attracted customers. "Your work has value," she would tell them, her voice firm with conviction. "Never let anyone convince you otherwise. When you price your tamales, remember the early mornings, the burnt fingers, the knowledge you've gained. That all has worth." She even helped some of them secure small loans from local merchants who had come to respect Xochitl's business acumen, enabling them to start their own complementary business selling fresh salsas, traditional aguas frescas, or handmade crafts alongside Xochitl's tamales. The market became a showcase of women's entrepreneurship, each stall supporting the others. The impact on the community was visible and profound. Children who had been hungry and listless now had full bellies and brighter eyes that sparkled with possibilities. Houses that had been silent with despair now resonated with the sounds of newfound hope and industry. The market, once dominated by a few established vendors who controlled prices and supply, now flourished with new stalls offering a greater variety of authentic, homemade products that celebrated their culture and traditions. Word of the transformation spread beyond their small village. The local government, recognizing the positive change Xochitl had sparked, invited her to a special ceremony at the town hall. The mayor, a stern but fair man who rarely showed emotion, presented her with a certificate of recognition for her entrepreneurship and for empowering the women of the community. "Xochitl," the mayor announced, his voice echoing through the assembly filled with curious townspeople, "you haven't just built a successful business from nothing. You've ignited a flame of hope and self-sufficiency in our people. You've shown us that one person with determination can lift an entire community. You are an inspiration to us all." Xochitl, though shy under the spotlight and uncomfortable with such public attention, accepted the honor with grace, attributing her success to the hard work and dedication of every woman at the ranch. She spoke passionately about the importance of community, of resilience, and of the power of women supporting women in a world that often tried to keep them apart and powerless. "When we lift each other," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word, "we all rise. When we share our knowledge, we all become wiser. When we support each other's dreams, we create a future where our daughters won't have to struggle as we did." Later that night, back at the ranch as the last tamales were being wrapped for the next day's market, Crisanto, now a strong young man who had grown tall under their care, looked at Xochitl with eyes wide with admiration and love. "No manches, Xochitl," Crisanto exclaimed, shaking his head in amazement. "You've become the patron saint of the people. They speak of you in the market with reverence, like you're some kind of miracle worker." Xochitl laughed, the sound rich and full, so different from the broken sobs that had once been her only expression. "No saints here, Crisanto, just women who refused to give up. Just people who decided that together were stronger than any hardship." Years had indeed flown by like leaves on the wind, each one adding another layer of prosperity to Xochitl's thriving ranch. The simple cornfield had expanded into multiple plots, the single barn had grown into a complex of buildings, and the lone woman had become the center of a thriving community. Paloma, now a bright and spirited child with her mother's determination shining in her dark eyes, often ran through the busy courtyard, her laughter echoing amid the bustle of commerce and the murmur of conversations. She was everyone's daughter, doted on by all the women who worked there, each one teaching her their own skills and wisdom. Crisanto, no longer a boy but a robust young man with broad shoulders and kind eyes, watched over Paloma with the protective gaze of an older brother, his loyalty to Xochitl unwavering. He managed the fields now, having learned everything Xochitl could teach him about reading the earth and coaxing life from it. The ranch, once a desolate piece of land that seemed cursed, now pulsed with life and energy. Fields stretched as far as the eye could see, green and abundant, and the aromas of fresh tortillas and Xochitl's famous urban-fused tamales wafted from the busy kitchen at all hours, a testament to tireless work and innovative spirit. One sweltering afternoon, as the sun beat down on the dusty road leading to the ranch, a figure emerged from the shimmering heat like a ghost from the past. He was a man, thin and hunched as if carrying invisible burdens, his clothes ragged and covered with the dirt of many travels. His hair, once dark and thick with the vanity of youth, was now peppered with gray and matted with neglect. He shuffled forward with the gait of someone who had walked too far with nowhere to go, his eyes scanning the vibrant ranch landscape with a mixture of disbelief and something resembling desperate hope. Xochitl was overseeing the packing of tamales for market, her hands moving skillfully as she gave instructions to Elena and the other women. Her face, though still beautiful, bore the marks of experience and resilience that spoke of laughter and tears, of hardship overcome and joy earned. A strength emanated from her every movement, the quiet confidence of someone who had built an empire from nothing but determination and hope. The man shuffled closer, his gaze fixed on Xochitl with the intensity of a drowning man spotting shore. A tremor ran through him from head to toe. He recognized her, though she was transformed, radiating a confidence and power he had never seen. He cleared his throat, a dry, rough sound like sandpaper on wood. "Xochitl," Rigoberto said, his voice hoarse from disuse and shame, barely above a whisper. "Is it really you?" Xochitl paused, her hands stilling on the tamale she was wrapping. She turned slowly, deliberately, her ice and steady as deep water meeting his. There was no flash of surprise in her expression, no gasp of recognition, just a silent assessment that seemed to see through him to his very soul. She saw the years of hardship etched into his face like a map of poor choices, the defeat in his eyes that spoke of dreams turned to ash. He was a shadow of the man he had been, a specter of the person who had discarded her without a second thought. "Rigoberto," Xochitl said, her voice level and clear, without a trace of the anger or bitterness that had once consumed her, that had once made her feel like she was drowning in acid. "What brings you to my ranch?" The possessive pronoun was deliberate, a quiet assertion of ownership that made Rigoberto flinch. He took a hesitant step forward, his hands wringing together in front of his body like a penitent seeking absolution. I have nothing," Xochitl lost everything, everything. The land, the money, the respect. The woman I left you for shed took what little I had left and disappeared. I heard about you, about this." His gesture encompassed the thriving ranch, the busy workers, the evident prosperity. I came to ask for your forgiveness, for help, for mercy." His voice cracked on the last word and he looked away, unable to meet her steady gaze that seemed to strip him bare. Some of the women, sensing the tension crackling in the air like lightning before a storm, stopped their work, their eyes darting between Xochitl and the ragged stranger who seemed to shrink under their collective gaze. Elena, her hand instinctively going to the knife at her belt she used for cutting vegetables, watched Rigoberto with deep suspicion. She had heard Xochitl's story, knew what this man had done. Xochitl, however, remained unruffled, a queen holding court. She took a deep breath, and then, her voice echoing across the courtyard with the authority of someone who had earned every word, she spoke. It wasn't a shout, not a lament, but a declaration, delivered with the quiet authority of someone stating simple facts. "Rigoberto," Xochitl said, each word clear as a bell, "you left me in that barn, abandoned and alone, with nothing but the clothes on my back and a heart full of despair. You threw me away like garbage, deemed me worthless because I couldn't give you sons." She paused, letting the words settle like dust, her gaze unwavering. But what you thought was my end was actually my beginning. What you meant for evil became my salvation. You gave me the strength to build my own empire, though you never meant to. This ranch, these fields, these women, this life. It's all a testament to the resilience that you, unknowingly, forged in me. Every success here is built on the ashes of what you burned down. Rigoberto cringed as if struck, his shoulders sinking even lower, disappearing into himself. He tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air, but no words came. Xochitl continued, her voice firm but devoid of hatred. The opposite of hate wasn't love. She had learned but indifference. There's nothing here for you, Rigoberto. No place in my life, no forgiveness to be given in the way you seek it. The past is past. It doesn't define me anymore, and it won't detain me. I've moved beyond needing closure from you. She turned to one of the women. Please bring him a plate of food. He looks hungry, and we never turn away the hungry. The woman, though hesitant and clearly disapproving, quickly obeyed, returning with a generous portion of stew and tortillas that steamed in the afternoon heat. Xochitl took the plate and extended it to Rigoberto with steady hands. Eat, Xochitl said simply, and then you must go. Your path no longer intersects with mine. Find your own redemption elsewhere. Rigoberto took the plate with trembling hands. His fingers brushing hers for a moment, felt nothing at the contact. No spark of old feeling, no flicker of remembered love. He looked at the food as if it might bite him, then back at Xochitl, a flash of something unreadable in his eyes, perhaps, a mixture of humiliation, regret, and a dawning understanding of the chasm between them that could never be bridged. He had come seeking comfort, charity, perhaps hoping to manipulate old feelings, but found only the harsh reality of his own making. The woman he had discarded had become someone beyond his reach, not through cruelty, but through growth. He began to eat slowly, mechanically, as if each bite was difficult to swallow the food of his shame. When he finished, he stood, his gaze lingering on Xochitl for a moment longer, drinking in the sight of what might have been his if he hadn't been such a fool. He opened his mouth as if to speak, to apologize again, to beg, to rage, but then thought better of it. What words could possibly matter now? He simply nodded, a curt, defeated gesture that acknowledged the finality of her dismissal. Rigoberto turned and shuffled away, his figure diminishing as he retreated down the dusty road, swallowed by the shimmering heat that had birthed him. He was a ghost of the past, banished from a future he had forfeited through his own cruelty and short-sightedness. Xochitl watched him go, her expression serene as a still lake. She didn't look back with longing or regret, didn't dwell on the pain he had inflicted or the life that might have been. Her eyes were fixed on the vibrant life of her ranch, on Paloma's laughter as she played with the other children, on the determined faces of the women working alongside her, on Emiliano returning from the fields with Crisanto, both covered in honest dirt and wearing satisfied smiles. Her past no longer defined her. Her present and her future were hers to shape, built on resilience, community, and the unshakable strength of her own spirit. The ranch bustled with life around her, a testament to what could be built from nothing but determination and hope. She had transformed abandonment into abundance, betrayal into triumph. As Rigoberto's figure disappeared entirely from view, Xochitl turned back to her work, her hands resuming their steady rhythm. There were tamales to wrap, orders to fill, women to guide, and a life to live, a life she had built with her own hands from the ruins of despair. Back to work, senoras, she called out with a smile that held no shadows. These tamales won't wrap themselves, and we have customers waiting. The women returned to their tasks with renewed energy, the strange interruption already fading into irrelevance. Life at the ranch continued, vibrant and unstoppable, a river flowing toward a bright future that belonged to no one but themselves. Months passed, and the ranch pulsed with even greater life, a kaleidoscope of vibrant colors and joyful sounds that announced celebration. Laughter mixed with the strumming of guitars and the rhythm of drums, echoing through the sun-drenched courtyard like a song of triumph. Today was a day of celebration that marked not just a union, but the culmination of a remarkable journey, a testament to the power of human resilience. Xochitl, radiant in a simple but elegant white dress that Elena and the other women had sewn for her with loving hands, stood beside Emiliano, their hands intertwined like their lives had become, their eyes reflecting a deep love that had blossomed amid adversity like a desert flower after rain. Crisanto, now a tall, handsome young man who wore his finest clothes with pride, stood as Emiliano's best man, a testament to the family they had formed through choice rather than blood. Paloma, a young woman in bloom with Xochitl's determined spirit shining in her movements, was the maid of honor, her smile as bright as the morning sun that blessed their union. The entire community had gathered, a sea of familiar faces that had become family, each one a witness to the triumph of a woman who had transformed pain into purpose. Xochitl looked out at the assembled crowd, her heart overflowing with gratitude that threatened to spill from her eyes as tears of joy. So many lives had been touched by her journey, so many women empowered by her example. Elena, once a timid widow, now managed the thriving tamale business with confidence that made her stand tall, her culinary skills legendary throughout the region. She had even opened her own small restaurant in town, employing other women and continuing the cycle of empowerment. Doña Remedios, her eyes glistening with pride that needed no words, sat in the front row like a queen holding court, a silent guardian who had witnessed Xochitl's transformation from despair to strength indomitable. The other women, Maria, Carmen, and so many more, wore their finest dresses, their faces glowing with the prosperity and dignity that Xochitl's leadership had brought to their lives. Crisanto, with his quiet wisdom and unwavering loyalty, had become like a son to her, and Paloma, a daughter who would never know the despair her mother had conquered. Emiliano, her rock, her partner in every sense of the word, stood beside her with steady presence that promised a lifetime of shared strength. His love had never sought to diminish her, but to support her growth, understanding that her independence was not a threat but a gift. The ceremony was brief but deeply moving, conducted by the local priest who had watched Xochitl's transformation with amazement. He spoke of love that was patient and kind, of resilience that could move mountains, and of the power of community to heal the deepest wounds. As Xochitl and Emiliano exchanged vows they had written themselves, a collective sigh of happiness rippled through the crowd like wind through corn stalks. This was more than just a wedding. It was a testament to the enduring human spirit, a beacon of hope for all who had faced hardship and wondered if joy would ever return. Later, as the festivities continued with music that made even the eldest dance and food that celebrated their culture and success, Xochitl found herself drawn to a quiet corner of the ranch, a place that held special significance in her heart. She looked at the barn that had been her first shelter, a slight smile playing on her lips. It was there, in that very spot now transformed, that her journey had truly begun, amid despair and uncertainty that had seemed insurmountable. It was there she had found the strength to gather the pieces of her shattered life, to plant the first seeds of what would become a flourishing empire of love and resilience. The barn, once a symbol of her abandonment, was now a silent reminder of her unbreakable spirit, a monument to the power of refusing to surrender. The ranch, once desolate and forgotten as a grave, pulsed with undeniable energy. Children laughed as they chased each other through the fields where corn grew tall and proud, their voices a joyful symphony that spoke of futures unlimited by circumstance. The scent of fresh tortillas and simmering stews floated from the kitchens where women worked side by side, a comforting smell that spoke of abundance and warmth, of traditions preserved and new ones being born. The women of the community, once isolated and struggling against a world that seemed stacked against them, now worked as sisters, their hands busy with purpose, their voices full of animated conversations about orders to fill, new recipes to try, children's achievements to celebrate. Xochitl had become their mentor, their guide, teaching them not just culinary skills, but the invaluable lessons of independence and self-worth that no one could take away. She saw herself reflected in their eager faces, in their determined eyes that no longer looked down in shame, and knew that her legacy would continue to flourish through them long after she was gone. Chrysanto approached her, a cup of fresh water in his hand, his eyes full of the respect and love of a son. "You look beautiful, Xochitl," he said, his voice filled with genuine affection. "But then, you always do when you're happy." Xochitl smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners with laugh lines earned through joy, not just sorrow. "Thank you, my son," she replied, placing her hand on his arm with maternal affection. "All of this is because of you too, you know. You and Paloma gave me reasons to keep fighting when I might have given up." Paloma joined them, her arm linked with Chrysanto's, her young face glowing with pride and love. "You built something incredible, Mama," Paloma said, her voice filled with admiration and understanding beyond her years. "It's more than just a ranch. It's a home for all of us, a place where dreams don't have to die." Xochitl's gaze swept over the vibrant Ceneth dancing that had spontaneously erupted in the courtyard, the feast that celebrated not just her wedding but their collective success, the joyful camaraderie that bound them all together. She saw the faces of Elena, Doña Remedios, and so many others, all of whom had found new beginnings at the ranch. She saw Emiliano, his eyes fixed on her with a love that promised partnership, not ownership, a promise of a lifetime of shared happiness built on mutual respect. She saw Chrysanto and Paloma, the future generation, ready to carry forward the values she had instilled in them: importance of hard work, the power of compassion, the strength found in community. A profound sense of peace enveloped her like a warm embrace. From the depths of despair that had once threatened to drown her, she had cultivated a garden of hope that now flourished beyond her wildest dreams. From the ashes of betrayal that had burned everything she thought she knew, she had built a fortress of love that sheltered not just her but an entire community. The ranch, her ranch, was no longer just a piece of land. It was a living testament to the power of human resilience, a vibrant tapestry woven with threads of kindness, hard work, and unshakable faith in the possibility of tomorrow. She took a deep breath, her chest expanding with pure joy that seemed to light her from within. The sun began to set, casting long golden shadows through the fields, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed to celebrate with them. The music softened to a gentle melody, and a hush fell over the crowd as Xochitl raised her cup, her voice clear and strong, echoing through the courtyard with the power of truth. "Esta es nuestra cosecha, mi gente," she declared, her eyes glistening with unshed tears of happiness. "La cosecha de la vida. This is our harvest, my people, the harvest of life itself." The words hung in the air like a blessing, a powerful echo of her journey from abandonment to abundance, a testament to the triumph of the human spirit over circumstances that would have broken a lesser soul. The ranch, once a symbol of abandonment and despair, now pulsed with life and hope, a living legacy of love and resilience that would endure for generations. As the celebration continued into the night, with stars beginning to pepper the darkening sky like scattered corn kernels, Xochitl danced with Emiliano, her head resting against his chest, feeling his heartbeat that matched her own. Around them, their community celebrated not just a wedding but a victory over despair, a triumph of hope over abandonment, of love over indifference. The circle of life had turned, and from the ashes of her old life, Xochitl had built something beautiful and lasting, a legacy that would nurture and inspire long after the last dance was danced and the final toast was made. Years continued to pass like seasons, each one adding richness to the tapestry of their lives. The ranch of Xochitl was no longer just a ranch. It had evolved into a vibrant center of community life, a gathering place for celebration and commerce, a symbol of prosperity and unity that drew visitors from distant villages. Each year, at the height of the corn harvest, when the field stood tall and golden, Xochitl organized the Festival de la Cosecha, a celebration that had become legendary throughout the region. The ranch's courtyard, once silent and dusty as a tomb, now transformed into a sea of colors, sounds, and aromas that assaulted the senses with joy. Colorful stalls sold Xochitl's famous tamales, fresh tortillas that were still warm from the comal, spicy salsas that made eyes water with pleasure, and aguas frescas made with fruits from the region that provided cool relief from the heat. Children ran between the stalls, their laughter mixing with the sound of guitars and harps, while the aroma of roasted corn and seasoned meat floated in the air like incense in a cathedral of community. Xochitl, now a woman of middle age with silver threading through her hair like moonlight silver that only enhanced her beauty, and Wista moved through the crowd with innate grace, greeting everyone with a warm smile and embrace that made each person feel seen and valued. Paloma, her daughter, now a stunning young woman who had inherited her mother's strength and her father's steady nature, worked alongside her mother with movements as fluid and confident as Xochitl's own. She had inherited her mother's determination and the wisdom of Doña Remedios, and was preparing to take on a leadership role in the family business while also studying to become a teacher, determined to pass on the gift of knowledge as her mother had done. Crisanto, now a mature man respected throughout the community for his fairness and hard work, supervised the corn fields with the expertise of someone who had learned to read the earth's moods, ensuring the harvest was bountiful and that everyone had enough to eat and sell. He had married Elena's eldest daughter, and they were expecting their first child in author generation to carry forward the legacy of resilience and hope. Emiliano, the silent pillar of the family whose steady presence had never wavered, watched it all with a gleam of pride in his eyes that spoke louder than words. His hand was always ready to support Xochitl's, not because she needed it, but because partnership meant standing together. Their love had deepened with the years, seasoned by shared struggles and joys into something unbreakable. Doña Remedios, though more fragile with age, her movements slower but her mind still sharp as obsidian, remained a constant presence. She sat on a shaded bench that had become her throne, welcoming everyone with a wise smile and hands that still remembered the feel of herbs and healing. She offered advice to young mothers, healed minor ailments with her herbs that grew in the expanded garden, and shared stories of the past with anyone who would listen, teaching new generations about the importance of land and community, of remembering where they came from while building where they were going. During the festival, Xochitl always dedicated a moment to address the crowd. She would position herself on a small makeshift platform that Emiliano had built, with the golden cornfield as her backdrop, a living testament to what determination could achieve. Her voice, though soft with age, carried the strength of mountains and the wisdom of rivers, friends, neighbors, family. She would begin, her voice clear and resonant with the authority of someone who had earned every word. Many years ago, this ranch was a place of despair. I was alone, afraid, and without hope, cast aside like chaff from wheat. She would pause, allowing her words to sink into the hearts of her listeners like rain into thirsty soil. The crowd would grow quiet, even the children sensing the importance of this moment. But the earth taught us patience. The community welcomed us with open arms, and love gave us strength to do what seemed impossible. She would gesture to the women working in the stallswomen whose lives had been transformed, who now stood tall with dignity and purpose. She would point to the children playing children, who would never know the hunger their parents had suffered. She would indicate the fields of corn that stretched as far as the eye could see, fields that had begun with a handful of seeds that seemed too old to grow. This festival, this harvest, is not just about the corn we grow. It's about the hope we planted in barren ground, the resilience we cultivated when the world told us we would fail, and the love we share that makes us stronger than any hardship. Her voice would rise with passion, carrying across the crowd like a benediction. Each kernel of corn represents a dream fulfilled, Each tortilla made with loving hands carries the strength of women who refuse to be broken. Each tamal wrapped in corn husks holds the stories of our struggles and triumphs. We are not just feeding Bodhiswe, our nourishing souls, preserving traditions and building futures. The crowd would erupt in applause that seemed to shake the very earth, and Xochitl would step down from the platform to be embraced by her community or true family that extended far beyond blood relations. As the years continued to unfold like corn husks revealing golden kernels, the ranch's influence spread throughout the region. Young women came from distant villages to learn from Xochitl and her team, carrying back not just recipes but lessons in leadership, self-worth, and the power of community. The ranch had become a school of sorts, where the curriculum included not just cooking but confidence, not just business but believing in oneself. Xochitl's story became legend, told by grandmothers to granddaughters, by mothers to daughters, a tale that reminded them that no matter how dark the night, dawn would always come for those who refused to surrender to the darkness. It was a story of transformation that gave hope to the hopeless, strength to the weak, and courage to those who thought they had none left. And at the center of it all stood Xochitl, no longer the abandoned woman crying in a decrepit barn, but a matriarch, a leader, a beacon of hope whose light had illuminated the path for countless others. She had taken the bitter seeds of betrayal and abandonment and cultivated them into a harvest of love and prosperity that would feed generations to come. As she stood in her fields at sunset, watching the corn sway in the evening breeze like dancers celebrating life itself, Xochitl knew that her journey was far from over. Each day brought new challenges and new triumphs, new women to mentor and new dreams to nurture. But she faced each dawn with the confidence of someone who had already survived the worst life could offer and emerged not just intact but triumphant. The harvest of life continued, season after season, year after year, each cycle bringing new growth, new possibilities, and new proof that from the darkest soil, the most beautiful flowers could bloom. And Xochitl, with her family of blood and choice around her, stood ready to tend that garden for as long as the earth would have her, knowing that her legacy would continue to flourish long after she returned to the soil that had given her everything. In the end, it wasn't the corn that was her greatest harvest, it was the lives she had touched, the women she had empowered, the community she had built, and the love she had cultivated. That was the true cosecha de la vida, a harvest that would never end as long as there were those who remembered her story and carried forward her legacy of resilience, hope, and unbreakable spirit. The ranch stood as a monument not to one woman's success, but to the power of community, the strength found in supporting one another, and the miracles that could grow from seeds of hope planted in even the most barren ground. And as the sun set on another harvest festival, painting the sky in the brilliant oranges and purples that had witnessed Xochitl's transformation, the music played on, the laughter continued, and life, beautiful, challenging, triumphant life went on. For in the end, that was Xochitl's greatest lesson. That life, like corn, would always find a way to grow toward the light, no matter how deep the darkness from which it began. And in that truth lay the hope for every woman who had ever been told she was worthless, every person who had ever been abandoned, every soul who had ever wondered if tomorrow was worth facing. The answer Xochitl's life proclaimed with every sunrise over her thriving ranch was always yes. Yes to hope, yes to hard work, yes to community, yes to love, yes to the endless possibility of transformation, yes to the harvest of life itself.